modern idea of confetti in the US really is heavily tied to New York and the ticker tape parades that were created in the wake of Wall Street using these stock market things. So they just had all this excess, basically strips of paper, and they started throwing them out the windows, basically. And throw out paper kind of sucks, but it's fine. Cray paper, kind of even thinner paper, kind of caused some issues, but basically it's fine. It's really post-World War II and really starting in the 1970s that we switch. And the example I always think of is New Orleans. So New Orleans and Mardi Gras, people throw things, not exactly confetti, but sort of the same idea. Historically, all of those throws were made in Eastern Europe. They were glass necklaces, glass ceramic type of things. People would catch them and they would save them and they would have them for a long time. Starting in the 70s, it became cheaper to produce plastic beads. And around the same time, our confetti switched from primarily plant-based materials to petroleum-based materials. And since that 70s time, it's just gone up and up and up and up. So these impacts that we can talk about are really a pretty new phenomenon in the last couple decades.
Really two just big picture impacts, and that is that when confetti is littered, it can be mistaken as food by terrestrial biota. And then secondly, it can blow or it can wash into our waterways, so our creeks or our coastal waters. And then a whole nother set of impacts occur where we have the release of toxic chemicals from the confetti into water. But we also have, biota, aquatic biota that can mistake the confetti as food. So those are like the two, large picture ideas of what happens to the confetti after it is littered, after it's used and not picked up. Some confetti is paper, and if it doesn't have what we call polymeric dyes in it, then it can most likely degrade fairly easily and not be of strong environmental impact. But a lot of the newer confetti, the confetti that and glitter that's shiny, it is made of plastic. And if it's, in some cases, it's actually even coated with metals like zinc and copper to give that metallic look to it. And that means that when confetti is littered, you are littering plastic and you are littering metals. And I think it's well known that both of those are detrimental in our environment.
People think, oh, it's just a little bit of paper and a few little sprinkles, a little sparkles of glitter or these little punched out bits of confetti. It makes it difficult to clean up, right? And so the size of these things becomes important. And I'll relate that to our research into microplastics. So one of the issues when glitter and these small pieces of confetti are left out in the environment and they are difficult to clean up, is that they don't degrade, they don't biodegrade, they just break up into smaller and smaller pieces. So things like glitter that might be made of something like PET, which is the same kind of material that water bottles are made of. And then as Mary mentioned, they have this aluminized or metallized coatings. So those are going to persist in the environment. So they might be very small, but that also is an issue for organisms that live in the environment that might want to eat something like that. And I do a lot of work in the marine environment. So a planktivorous fish or zooplankton or something that's going to be looking for small prey articles cannot distinguish necessarily these small anthropogenic particles from food, particularly because a lot of plastics are buoyant, or even if they're denser than water, they tend to be resuspended in the marine environment. So the small size and the fact that these plastics kind of break into smaller and smaller pieces means that they're persistent in the environment and they're bioavailable to a lot of organisms that could eat them.
I think most people, when they go to get their graduation picture or their confetti, as we were talking about, they see it as in the moment, right? And let me just use this thing right now and take this picture and all this kind of cool stuff. But because we've made this confetti out of substances that are designed to not break down, are designed to be persistent. It's not like the old paper. It's not like the old rice or bird seed or something of that nature. These substances have been engineered to persist for a long time. So as a consequence, when they get washed down to something, when critter A ingests it, it doesn't necessarily get converted to something else. And then critter B ingests critter A and picks that up. And so it continues to go on. Where people have done some recent work on this in places like the Great Lakes, we're seeing significant accumulation of glitter, right? You're like, glitter, like where the hell is glitter coming from, right? It's coming from these types of activities. And by definition, sometimes if we're using like a plastic cup like this, it's easy for us to say, oh, well, if everybody just behaved properly, it would go into the waste stream and then that wouldn't be a problem. But by definition, this glitter is being thrown out and left, right? And so that's one of two things. That either means a lot of sweeping and scraping up for the cleanup crew, or in most cases, it means it's just sitting there. And so nature is the cleanup crew. So nature, organisms, water moving around the surface of the earth, and then the organisms that are living in that water are the primary recipients of that. And we're seeing the signal all over the place in terms of where we look for these types of substances. Essentially everywhere on earth we've looked for these things, we've found them. We found them in beaches, we found them underwater, we found them in rivers, we found them in the air, all over the place. And it's because we make so many of these. Illustrations about this is that we are seeing this move into critters, move into organisms, accumulate in organisms when it need not to. With a little teeny tweak, we could avoid all of that. And that's the frustrating part, that we don't have to invent some new technology. The alternatives exist. But there's companies now that specialize in an environmentally friendly eco, however you want to phrase it, confetti. And so absolutely you guys can buy those things. But I would say you can do that. You can also just get some simple, regular paper, non-metallic, non-fancy paper, and slice it up yourself. You can throw it through a paper shredder. You can do it with a hand scissors if you want. You can use a hole punch. And by definition, the fact that we want to kind of throw it, we don't need 17 pounds of it, right? We need a couple fistfuls, a couple handfuls. And so a few sheets of paper, maybe a red piece of paper and a white piece of paper. I mean, that's going to do it for you. You can actually make it yourself for very close to nothing, or you can purchase stuff. The stuff you purchase also, there's two sort of broad categories. There's stuff like we mentioned before, which would be just paper and substances that would degrade very quickly or break down very quickly. But then there's also substances that can add to the environment. So one of the things people do is they will get things like native wildflower seeds, right? Which the seeds aren't sparkly, the seeds or whatever, but it gets that idea of throwing stuff. And when you're left over, you're going to be leaving native plants behind. So there's a couple broad categories. All of that stuff, it's a perfect time now to get those. If you do want to order some of those special, made things, you still have plenty of time to get those before graduation. Or you can just make it yourself tonight, and you can go ahead and while you're watching TV or streaming your Netflix, you could be slicing stuff up and be making your own little pile of confetti.
If you're doing this for the gram, right? If you're doing this to put it on your Instagram, maybe there's, just a photographic filter that you can use, that you don't necessarily need to physically have the confetti. You can, digitally add your confetti after the fact, and then you get, the look of it. If it's just for the look, if it's just for your pictures, maybe you don't need the physical confetti.
You can make your own in terms of paper. You can buy specialized paper. You can buy paper with seeds already in it. And when you blow your confetti, you'll actually be having, like Sean said, adding something to the environment. You do want to make sure they are native seeds, though, right? We don't want, for example, in my 100 class, we were just talking about invasive species, right? You don't want to accidentally add an invasive species by adding a non-native seed. But yeah, the two categories I saw were paper and then flower petals.
Celebration is very important. And I think particularly in this year where we've been apart from each other, I think it's very important to have parties. It's very important to have some spectacular celebrations. And the fact that our students are graduating is a huge, that's up there with high school graduation, marriages, funerals. This is an important day in their life. So I think it totally makes sense that people want to celebrate and do all that kind of stuff. All kinds of cool stuff. Like Dr. Steele was talking about, leaf punching and stuff. It's an opportunity for you to express yourself, right? It's not about being woke or being guilty. It's about, hey, does it really make sense for 5 minutes of fun to have a legacy that's going to sit on the ground for weeks and weeks and months and in critters for years? That sucks. That seems like a D-bag kind of move, right? Instead, hey, can we do something, still have all the fun, but have some of our own flavor in it and do it in a fun way and whatever? And by the way, avoid all of that badness. That's, I think, the way what we want to see.